Okay, we move on to Father Richard Das.
Very good afternoon, everyone, and also good afternoon to all those online. Before I continue with my presentation, I would like to acknowledge with a lot of gratefulness Father Hans Zollner, who actually motivated me to do this research. And also remember my moderator, Professor Wim from Leuven University, Belgium, and also my second moderator, Angela Rinaldi. For today's presentation, I have the title, Cultural Factors Shaping Male Sexual Abuse Disclosure in Indian Seminaries. This is taken from my research that I concluded last year, 2025, titled Male Sexual Abuse in Indian Seminaries, Impact on Spiritual Life and Psychological Well-Being. During this presentation, I do not intend to present all of my findings. Rather, I would like to focus on one of the aspects that relates to the theme of this conference. So therefore, I have taken the aspect of cultural factors driving the silence among men. Now, after having seen China, Africa, I invite you to travel to Asia. In Asia, South Asia. In South Asia, India. In India, South India. And here I am, and we heard yesterday about women. Here I am to talk about men. Yes, when you think about men, there's a lot of voices been raised about what has been from our part, not done well. Here I am to talk about men who have difficulty. Men who can't disclose the trauma. Men who can't talk about the abuse. Men who can't seek help. One of my findings also suggested or also support self-reliance aspect, how drives men not to seek for help. So therefore, the aspect of disclosure, what cultural factors that hold back men to disclose their difficulties and seek help and receive adequate help further. And I'll give you also briefly from what point of view I'm talking here. I'm talking from the aspect of, in the ambience of the formation, in the seminary formation. When I talk about abuses, this is between a formator, a seminary rector, and the formis. So very unique aspect, a first of its kind research in India. And why this is also very important, I would like to underline before I proceed, is that because of this non-disclosure, there is a massive difficulty to find data. And as a researcher, it's very difficult to find empirical data to do what is research in line with safeguarding. So here I am to unveil you the silenced phenomenon. This presentation explores the critical meeting point of religion, culture, and trauma in Indian Catholic seminaries. Utilizing constructivist grounded theory, the study focuses on the lived experiences of 8 participants. Yes, I had 15 of them, only 8 made it for the final interviews. They are priests, seminarians, and ex-seminarians. The research addresses the chronic lack of data and the conspiracy of silence. When you look at the context, the existing literature on clergy abuse focuses predominantly on Western contexts. Male survivors in South Asian countries like India, religious institutions remain largely absent from safeguarding research. The absence of culturally informed safeguarding frameworks in Indian seminaries represents a critical gap, one with direct implications for the global church commitment to survivors-centered protection. Way back in 2007, there was a research done in India by the Ministry of Welfare for the Women and Children, which notified that about 53% of boys experienced one form or the other sexual abuses, which underlines the institutional gap, that is the high societal prevalence versus near zero reporting within religious settings. So here, when I present to you the word barrier, I mean to say, what are the barriers that do not support the disclosure of men? So the first barrier is hegemonic masculinity and the vulnerability taboo. Just to help you understand the word hegemonic, the word comes from the Australian sociologist, Connell. Hegemonic means idealization, domination of manhood in a given society. So let's break down the specific cultural factors driving this silence. The first is hegemonic masculinity. In the Indian patriarchal framework, men are raised to be protectors, pillars of strength, and figures of control. Vulnerability is heavily stigmatized and culturally coded as a weak trait. Therefore, if a young man or boy is sexually abused, admitting to it means risking the loss of his masculine identity in the eyes of his peers and the society. Here means masculinity does not come by birth. Masculinity has to be gained. Masculinity has to be proved in the society. Therefore, victims heavily internalize this pressure, assuming that because they are men, they should have fought back. This intense internal shame forces them to lock trauma inside. Here I would like to invite you not just read, but listen. Listen to the words of one of my participants by name Jagan, 40 years old priest, who stated, "It's high time we recognize our own weakness and humbly accept, yes, I'm weak, abuse happened to me." Notice how, even in the process of healing and speaking out, he still feels culturally compelled to frame admitting victimization as accepting a weakness. This demonstrates just how deeply rooted the cultural demand for men in vulnerability remains, even inside spiritual formation like in seminaries. The second barrier is collectivism and family honor. The second major factor is collectivism. Unlike individualistic Western cultures where trauma is handled primarily as an individual health or legal issue, in India, the family is a core social unit. There's a powerful cultural concept of izzat, or family honor. If a son reveals he was sexually abused, it does not just impact his life, it stains his entire family, potentially damaging his siblings' marriage prospects and his parents' standing in the community. To maintain social harmony and shield their families from devastating public disgrace, victims make a conscious, tragic choice to sacrifice their own healing and remain in silence. The third barrier for disclosure is clergy idealization and power distance. Third, we must examine the specific institutional culture of clericalism, which is significantly amplified by local cultural norms of respecting elders and spiritual leaders, and in India we call spiritual gurus. Priests and seminary formators are heavily idealized. They are seen as literal representatives of God on earth. This creates an extreme power distance. A young candidate is taught that absolute obedience to his superior is equivalent to obedience to God. When that superior becomes an abuser, it causes cognitive dissonance. The victim often thinks priests cannot commit crimes. If something is wrong, it must be my fault, is one of the responses of the participant. Projecting an accusation upwards against the hierarchy becomes culturally and spiritually unthinkable. The fourth barrier is minority stress and institutional protectionism. A highly specific factor in this context is minority stress. In India, Christians make up a small minority of population. We are 2.3. We make 38 million Christians in India. The community can feel socially and politically vulnerable. Consequently, there is an intense, unspoken institutional pressure to conceal internal crimes. Church leaders and even the victims themselves fear that if a sexual abuse scandal involving a clergy goes public, hostile external groups will use it to attack or defame the entire community. As one participant noted, Christianity must survive. If they get one point, they will demolish everything. the victim is forced to carry the structural burden of protecting an entire religious minority by keeping silent. Key findings. 2 out of 3 participants disclosed abuse to at least one person. Only 1 in 3 disclosed to institutional authority. Fear of disbelief was the #1 cited barrier to disclosure. When you talk about disclosure, especially for men in the research, they speak about at least 20 years, 2 decades to come to the level to admit that abuse happened to them and they seek help. But in my research, I found 10 years plus years average delay before first disclosure of abuse. Shame and honor culture cited by 80% as key barrier. Trusted personal relationship was the primary enabler for disclosure. Bridging the gap, context-specific safeguarding solutions. Develop culturally adapted disclosure protocols that acknowledge shame, honor, and hierarchical difference in Indian seminary contexts. Provide mandatory training for formators and safeguarding officers on male victimization, cultural silence, and trauma-informed responses. Establish independent external accountability mechanisms within seminaries to ensure institutional transparency and survival-centered justice. To conclude, true safeguarding requires looking past universal policies to understand hidden cultural realities. The mandate, ensuring structural or institutional honor never outweighs a human life. Thank you for your attention.